Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to Canadian Gothic, a series by the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners. This episode is going to take us to North Bay, Ontario on a snowy night in March of 2011. 20-year-old Luke Joly-Durocher was in town for the weekend from his comparatively much smaller hometown that was just on the other side of the Ontario-Quebec border. Much like you'd probably expect during a 20-year-old's weekend away with friends, there was music, laughs, and a lot of drinks. Luke and three other friends headed to a downtown bar, but their night out together didn't seem meant to be. Luke's three friends were allowed into the establishment, but the bouncer turned Luke away. They must have thought he had a bit too much to drink. Now with his friends inside and Luke alone with the night in front of him, the mysteries start. And this is a case that has many of them. And despite the passage of 12 years, the most important mystery of that night still remains. Where is Luke? And that's the question we're going to tackle here tonight. In this episode, I'm going to be joined by Madelayne Kline to discuss the disappearance of then 20-year-old Luke Joly-Durocher.
On March 4th, 2011, Luke was staying at this house with friends. They headed to Cecil's bar, where Luke was turned away.
And nobody even paid attention to where Luke was. It seemed like they just forgot about him that night.
Ms. Madelayne Kline, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well. No complaints.
Okay. If my dad was here, he'd be like, good, because no one had listened to them anyway if you had them.
Well, he's right.
He would say something like that. I see behind you the sign says, beat with leaves. I have a hard time imagining in my head a baby in the shape of a beet with leaves, but
Yeah.
I get the...
Well, and I didn't even really like this description, and I was going to keep it as last week it was head of cauliflower, which was still like, that's not very cute, but whatever. But I locked my cat in here so I could do something uninterrupted, and I came back and an O, a W, and an L were mysteriously missing from the sign.
Weird.
So
it's almost like the cats know that they're going down in, importance around the house, and they think if they can prevent that sign from turning into like it's actually the size of a baby, maybe they can keep their position.
Right. I always think there's one I have 4 cats, and there's one I'm specifically worried about because he's my baby, and he's just like kind of mean. Like he's kind of mean, but I love him. But we call this room I'm in his room. But whenever
That's so sad.
I know. Whenever I think whenever he sees someone coming up from the basement, because we're working on our basement, I can't help but think he's like, I think the baby's really gonna like the basement.
Yeah, the baby's gonna have a nice room down there.
Yeah,
where
we're gonna throw the kid down there.
Let's get into our topic. A lot of listeners in Ontario had recommended the story of Luke Joly-Durocher as a topic to cover on the show. I'll ask you what you know about the case, or if you were familiar with it in a sec. But I'll tell you, as an East Coaster, this seems to be a high-profile missing persons case in Ontario. I don't recall seeing much news, if any, about his story down here on the East Coast, which is pretty weird, right?
Well, yeah, because it is. I would consider it very high profile.
Mm-hmm.
When I started doing my little crime talk journey, like almost 2 years ago, Luke was one of the most suggested missing persons cases.
When we were picking out the topic for tonight, I keep like a database of all the topic recommendations I get from listeners, and I had so many people requesting we cover Luke's story, and that, when I open up a couple articles and start reading about it, I was just so drawn in. I spent the last 5 or 6 days just reading and watching and listening to everything I could about him, and it's such a puzzling mystery, but it's also one that I think we're going to cover this story now, and I don't think it's going to be very long before there's a major update in this case. I don't know why, but it strikes me as a story that is going to have resolution.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll get into it, but there's just like, I feel like there's so much information about the night in question, but there's still a few very important holes that we clearly cannot fill. And yeah, hopefully something does come about soon.
Yeah, we'll get into this as we go through the timeline and discuss his case, but there's also what I found in Luke's story, maybe more so than any other I've covered, is there's very much the official story that the police have shared through their many press conferences, and then there is the story that people are talking about online. And it seems like there's a whole lot of details that people are discussing online that don't come up in any of the police press conferences. So I'm wondering, like, are some of these facts disputed, or are they unproven, like just not true? But we'll get into some of that as we go. And as we talk about the timeline, when we get to something that is often discussed but not mentioned by the investigators, I'll try to make a note of it as we talk, because I did come upon several items like that I think are noteworthy. But let's start at the very beginning with some of the background on Luke Joly-Durocher. He is from Quebec, small town guy. He was born in a place called Quebec First Nation, which in my search appears to have a population of about 300 people. So very small places where he was born, but he grew up in a neighboring community, Témiscamingue, Quebec, which is about, it's on the Quebec-Ontario border. And a lot of the story we're going to talk about happens right on that border. Where he's from, where he grew up, Témiscamingue, is about an hour away from the nearest city being North Bay, which is across the Quebec border into Ontario. Other than the geography, anything you want to say about Luke? What people say about him, what he was like or is like?
By all accounts, he was just like a great guy. Wasn't particularly like off. No one, when someone goes missing, no one's going to be like, oh, they were an awful person.
They were the type that would go missing.
Right, exactly.
That said, with Luke though, I've seen a lot of clips of interviews with his parents and friends. Everyone described him as a really happy, always smiling, caring guy, easy to get along with.
My son really, everybody loved Luke. He was happy going. He's always smiling, even though it wasn't even funny. Like, some people say, what are you smiling about? Oh, I'm just smiling.
He's a very, very social guy, very easy to talk to.
With Luke's photos and seeing like his face, I believe them. Like, he always has a huge smile on, and just big bright-eyed guy. Like, he just looks like a really happy, healthy, average, normal guy. Like, he doesn't look like someone that would stand out in any negative way. He doesn't look like he was involved in anything that would put him in danger. As far as his interests, what gets talked about the most is he's had a lifelong passion for music. He wasn't like a professional musician or like touring in a band or anything like that, but from a young age he was into guitar. There's videos going around of him singing and playing guitar as a young man and as an adult. That seemed to be his passion for as much as I can tell.
He seems like the kind that wouldn't hurt a fly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just like laid back, probably wouldn't even gossip with you if you tried. Just, fun to be around, and just like generally a nice person.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get into the actual timeline surrounding his disappearance. And you mentioned it at the beginning, is there's like a lot known about the night of his disappearance. This isn't one of those cases where there's a big build up to all these events playing out and he disappears. Luke's story really takes place within several hours on the evening of Friday, March 4th, 2011. Again, we talked about he's from the Quebec side of the border, but he had a friend who had just recently moved to the town or city of North Bay, Ontario. At this point, Luke's 20 years old. Again, he has a friend who moves into an apartment in North Bay, and Luke and another buddy, they go to spend the weekend at this apartment in North Bay. They're, the apartment their friend just moved into. So this story is going to take place about an hour away from the town he's from, in the Ontario city of North Bay. 20-year-old Luke and his buddy Brent are up there for the weekend. It's been a while since I went and stayed with some friends who just got an apartment. I think it's probably fresher in your mind, so maybe you can better relate to what they had going on. Tell me about Luke's night at this apartment.
Well, I was going to say it's like I miss being 20 because that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, they went to this apartment and they were drinking and playing beer pong and warming the house, if you will.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, housewarming.
They were celebrating a move.
Yeah. Well, when you're 20 and your friend gets an apartment, that's a big deal.
Oh yeah, especially if it's one of the first. It's like, oh my God, yes,
this is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. They were, and when you look, I went on Google Maps to get a look at this apartment because I've seen it and read it described as a rundown apartment in a rundown neighborhood. When you look at this apartment, it's like a 4-unit. Like it's like an old house that's been divided into 4 units with a couple additions that were probably added on way after the fact. It's in a neighborhood filled with older homes, and this is a corner lot, so it's like a house on the corner of 2 streets, and it's just not a great looking place. Luke and Brent,
those are the best parties, though.
Oh,
those are always
sure,
the best
sure.
ones.
Luke and Brent are up there with the plan of spending the weekend. And as you described, they're drinking, listening to music, playing beer pong. At one point, it's said that the host, the person whose apartment it was, ended up bringing out Jello shots, which is a pretty good sign it's going to get wild. They were drinking Jello shots and doing all that stuff before coming to the decision to let's go downtown North Bay. Hit the clubs, go to some bars, which would be the obvious.
Those plans step were probably on the horizon anyway.
Yeah,
they probably
We call it in Cape Breton anyway. We call that pre-drinking.
Yeah,
we used to do
pre-gaming.
that. Yeah, we call it pre-drinking because we were all so cheap that we would like drink as much as possible before going out, so that way we don't have to buy drinks out.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Actually, I just saw something, and we're about to get there, but they go out around midnight.
Mm-hmm.
And that was totally on brand for my friends and I at the same time.
We'd
go out
same. Mm-hmm.
11, 12 o'clock. And I just saw something the other day and it said, this can't be the same 9 o'clock that I would start getting ready to go out at.
Yeah. It's that I couldn't imagine leaving my house at that hour of night to start the night. But as you say, 11:54 p.m. is right around the point that they arrive at the bar that they were going to. It was actually a group of 4 of them. It was Luke, his buddy Brent, who was in town with him, and 2 others. So the 4 of them came from that apartment. It's at 11:54 that they're actually seen walking into the nightclub. It's a club called Cecil's, which is a large popular bar downtown North Bay. This section of the night is super important, and it's corroborated by security videos. So we know exactly when they arrive. It's at 11:54. And we see the 4 of them kind of walking into the club one after another with Luke at the back. And, his buddy Brent gets in, the other 2 get in. When the time for Luke to speak to the bouncer, it doesn't go well, but his friends are already inside. The bouncer, and maybe this may be new for people who haven't spent a lot of times at late night dance bars and nightclubs and stuff, is the bouncer, as they let you in, they're also kind of screening you, like, is this person intoxicated or whatever. Luke must have been displaying too many signs of intoxication, and the bouncer didn't allow him in the nightclub, but his friends were already inside. And this part really bugs me because this is the first part that will really bug me. But I just feel like I've been in situations where that has happened, but the bartender or the bouncer would then like come in and get the rest of the party. Like, your friend didn't get in.
You'd think, or the friends would at least like kind of hover by the door until they all got in.
Yeah, especially if there was any question about if they were going to get in, and if you're there from out of town or something. Not blaming anyone because they were all drinking and stuff, but it's just the reason I'm leaning on this point is his friend Brent, who is again in town with him. claims that he went into the bar without realizing initially that Luke didn't get in. But when he realized he started, texting Luke like, "Hey, where are you?" But of course, he's already inside the bar. So Luke doesn't get in. He's turned away by the bouncer. I should maybe mention the weather because we're going to be following Luke outside. I looked at the historical data. It was hovering just below zero. And it was...
That's cold.
It's cold. It's cold. Not for us. I'm in Nova Scotia. That's nothing. I'd be out there in a t-shirt. And it was snowing. I've seen it described as a heavy snow or significant snowfall. I've seen that written in articles and stuff. But when I looked at the historical weather data for North Bay, it said that night was light snow. So it was snow, but the data from Weather Canada didn't suggest a snowstorm by any means. But regardless, Luke does not get in the bar. He is outside. When Luke first leaves the bar that he didn't get into, he kind of hovers around outside a little bit before going to a bar that's next door to Cecil's. That's a bit seen as a bit more of a wild bar. It's called the Zoo or Zoo. He goes to Zoo, but he doesn't enter the bar. He just kind of lingers around outside alone.
Right.
He kind of lingers around, and then from the Zoo nightclub, he just kind of walks off, and there's a bit of a debate about where he goes next after Zoo nightclub. But initially, when you watch and read the early news reports or even the initial press conferences that investigators hosted, they described this as his last known whereabouts.
Investigators have obtained the surveillance video from Cecil's bar and were able to confirm that Luke did attend with his friends. He was last seen entering the doorway but was turned away by bar staff due to his level of intoxication. His friends continued into the bar without him. Upon leaving the bar, Luke originally turned left on the patio, but considering there's no stairwell on the left-hand side, he turned around, walked past the entry door again. He then walked down the stairs onto Main Street. Surveillance video last shows him standing out in front of the Zoo nightclub at the time, and he's basically hovering around that area, and that's the last that we can see of him on surveillance video. We don't know which direction he's actually gone.
At this point, his buddy Brent and the others are inside the bar. They're texting Luke, where are you? But they don't get any response. He doesn't reply to them. Brent, his buddy, who was interviewed by CTV, explained that he expected to go back to the apartment where they were all going to spend the night and just see Luke sitting there, or have Luke show up, after being at another club or something. So without hearing from or getting a response from Luke, Brent eventually goes back to the apartment, goes to sleep thinking Luke's going to show up. He doesn't. He gets up the next morning when they they had plans to get the bus back into Quebec to their hometown. Luke doesn't show up for that either. And I think it's at this point that Brent begins to worry. I can't tell if it was Brent who went to Luke's parents or if Luke's parents some other way got, concerned about Luke. Somehow they know that Luke's friends weren't in contact with them, because when suspicion starts to arise of like, where is he? It doesn't seem to come from Luke's friends who were with him. It's coming from his parents. They have plans to have a party for his sister, a birthday party Sunday. It's really when he doesn't arrive home for that his parents begin to really see the concern.
Right. Well, because he was planning on staying the weekend. So that's what really confused me. I thought they were planning on staying the whole weekend and not getting a bus back the next day. But
it's one of those things. With the passage of time, it makes it harder as well. But I've read multiple versions of so many parts of this. But what I'm taking that part of the timeline from is Luke's friend Brent actually in a sit-down interview with CTV where he describes what he remembers. But that's how he described it. But as far as his parents, when Luke doesn't show up for the birthday, they're unable to reach him. None of his friends have seen him. They know something is up and they're starting to worry. Luke's mom is actually the first one who's like, I'm just going to go to North Bay. If he just got busy all weekend, we would have heard from him. This isn't normal. I'm going to go to the apartment that Luke was at. So she knew where he had been staying. So Monday morning, Friday, Saturday, Saturday, like 3 days later, is when Luke's mom shows up at the apartment. She's allowed in. It goes to the room that Luke was supposed to be staying, and she makes some discoveries that I think will really shapes how I view the main theories that are going around surrounding Luke's disappearance.
I was just shaken there and scared and not knowing. As I'm going, I had like a vision. I could see like the house, never seen it before. And I could see my son in the window, and he's like that in the window saying, "Mom, help me, Mom." Luke's phone was there on top of a speaker, a hoodie, and it was really damp, like sweaty, and his American Eagle jacket. So we ended up bringing those items with us, and then I went to the police station.
And can't you see him on numerous security footage in different locations wearing this jacket?
Mm-hmm. It seems so. The security footage, admittedly, is very poor quality. Some of the worst security footage I've seen. But he appears to have this jacket on. But the jacket. I
can't imagine he brought a ton of a whole wardrobe change.
No, that's right. And as you said, it's cold. It was a cold enough night that you would wear your jacket. So they find that stuff, or she finds that stuff there, pretty much directly from that home, from that apartment and that discovery. She heads to the police station to make the missing persons report. March 7th, 2011. Again, 3 days after he was last seen. And this is going to sound pretty cliche. How did the police handle that missing persons report?
They handled it like just like we know they would. They didn't take it super seriously. Probably because he was young and out at the bar, and they assumed he was just out partying or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was 2011. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't have left his cell phone at home. No. Prior to going to the bar, too.
Yeah, that's the thing. The family has criticized the police in their early handling of the missing persons report as saying the police seemed to just assume or decide almost that he was probably just ran off with a girl for a couple of days and whatever, and he'll show up. But without his jacket, his hoodie, and his phone, that to me, that's like, no, something's up.
Exactly. Like
nobody runs off without their phone.
Totally. And then his friends were saying, yeah, we were texting him. He was wearing the jacket. So something tells me that he was back at the apartment at one point before he went missing. Mm-hmm. But that's obviously not corroborated or anything, but that's just what I think, because he wouldn't have left his phone or his jacket that he was seen wearing.
Absolutely. So now is when, so now the missing persons report is filed. They don't know where he is. This is when he's without his phone and his jacket. And this is when the search really begins. So first of all, initially the search seems to be pushed ahead by family, passing out flyers, doing those sorts of things.
Always. No
sign of Luke turns up. Initially, no evidence. There is several kind of unconfirmed sightings in the early days, but nothing that really went anywhere. The first kind of investigative discovery is his debit card is discovered. It's discovered in a snowbank, almost in the middle between Cecil's Bar, where initially he was considered to be his last known whereabouts, and the apartment. So right in the middle between the two is when they find his debit card. So that leads police to search the immediate area surrounding, the streets around where the debit card was found, which also would be the streets of downtown North Bay, looking for any sign of Luke or anything else he may have dropped. Since we're on the topic of the debit card, with his bank activity, there was no activity, of course, after his disappearance. And the only activity leading up to his disappearance was a withdrawal of $20. So pretty measly sum of money. This withdrawal, I could not find definitively when the withdrawal happened. I don't know if it was
I was just
earlier
gonna
in the day.
ask.
Yeah, I haven't been able to find exactly when this had happened, but I know that during the night when he was out, he was said to have had $20 on him, and I know that his last known withdrawal happened on that day for a withdrawal of $20. So
Something tells me it was before, because cover charge is usually $5 and they don't take debit.
yeah, so yeah, it would make sense to me that he would have went to a bank machine before going to the bar and took $20.
Right.
So, and yeah, so they find the bank card. A search goes from there. They find nothing. It's not until 6 weeks after his disappearance that the police actually search the apartment that he was last staying in. And I to me, that's shocking because he was there if his stuff was dropped off. If he had that with him going to the bar, the next step for him, like the next obvious place that he was, you would think would have been the apartment since his stuff was dropped off there. 6 weeks later, investigators searched the apartment, but they've never revealed publicly the result of that search, if they found any evidence or, anything. They've kept that close to their chests for whatever reason. And I don't know if that means anything.
Well, and it was also a month and a half later. Like, what were they expecting to find?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's just crazy to me.
Yeah. Now, here's where it gets complicated. So after Luke was turned away from the bar, again, initially police were saying this is his last confirmed sighting, last known whereabouts. But there begins to be rumors about other places he was. So first of all, after he was denied entry to the bar, there's a piece of security footage. It has never been made public, so it's hard to say if it's real or if it's accurate. Apparently, you can see someone who looks like Luke and another man entering a Bank of Montreal, which is just a block up the street from the bar. What has been said about this footage, again, that isn't publicly available, is that you cannot see the person who people think may be Luke. You cannot see his face, so you can't confirm it's him. But it has led some people to speculate that that is Luke and another man entering the BMO. If so, that sighting if that sighting is actually him, the police have never referenced it in one of their press conferences that I could find. And I've watched several of them. I think I've seen them all. I've never seen the police mention this, but you'll find it written a lot that after leaving the bar, Luke and another man may have gone into a Bank of Montreal. Again, the security footage isn't publicly available. Police haven't referenced it.
The stuff that I've read about the bank security footage was that was he actually with this guy? Because I guess the other alleged person wasn't fully in the frame. You could just see someone kind of standing back. And they were like, well, was he with someone? Was he not? But like you said, it's never been released and never mentioned on record. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah, it is hard to say. Again, as we had said multiple times, at this point, the last known whereabouts were outside Cecil's, but it was rumored that he was also at another bar in a different part of North Bay that's a good ways away, like kind of like on the other side of the town or on the other side of the city. But it seemed to always be like speculative. The police never mentioned it for the longest time, but in a press conference in October of 2019, so 8 years after his disappearance, the police came out and said, we can confirm that after being turned away at Cecil's, lingering around outside of the Zoo nightclub, which is next door to Cecil's, for a short period of time, at some point later that night, Luke actually arrived to a bar called Shooter's.
Until recently, the last confirmed sighting was at 11:54 p.m. on March 4th, 2011 on Cecil's video. We are now certain that after Luke was refused entry from Cecil's Bar downtown, he attended Shooter's Bar, located at the Voyageur on Delaware Street. Luke was observed socializing at the bar, and we are aware that he later obtained a ride from at least one of the patrons. The Voyageur Inn is now the last confirmed sighting of Luke on March 4th, 2011.
They didn't give much information about what he did there or who he was with, and we can only assume he was alone, but they did say he left that bar with at least one person to get a drive. And again, I'm left assuming it's a drive back to the apartment, although he could have went to the apartment and then there, or there, then the apartment. But
well, how'd he get there? Because if it was a ways away and it was like damn near 0 degrees, I don't think he would have walked there, especially because it's so out of the way. He would have been like, I'm going to walk to Shooters.
Yeah, and if his friends are, well, I don't know, if you can't get a hold of his friends, you could, I'm just thinking about it. His phone, his friends are texting his phone, so he must have dropped off his phone pretty quick. I almost think like if he didn't get into Cecil's, maybe he went right back home and dropped off, and right back to the apartment, dropped off his phone, which doesn't make any sense. But that's kind of where the mystery comes in this, is like, what the hell was going on? But let's get a bit deeper into it here, because we don't know a lot about this time in Shooters. We just know that has become the last known whereabouts of Luke. There's no security footage of it, and very little information was given. But here's where it goes from interesting to just sketchy and awful. When you have a missing person case that gets a lot of news coverage in a town, people start to talk, for better or worse. Someone may know something or suspect something, or someone may just want to stir up crap and insert themselves into stories. And that happens all the time. There was what was initially thought to be a significant update in Luke's story when someone came forward and said that they witnessed Luke being beaten and killed in the area near the apartment. So this person claims they saw it happen. That led to police search with like canines and with dogs and everything. And the story was he was beaten and killed near the apartment by someone he owed money to, and they took his body back to his home in the area surrounding his hometown back in Quebec and buried it there. So police went and searched that area, didn't find anything. And then shortly after, I'm just going to read you the news article that I found covering this. Danielle Leduc Michel was sentenced to almost 2 years in jail, followed by probation for a year for obstructing justice by giving police wrong information, public mischief for falsely implicating others, by claiming Joly-Durocher was beaten to death and his body was dumped near his hometown in Temiskaming. So she ended up getting charged, the person who came forward. And not only that, yeah, but you think that I haven't heard of someone actually getting charged for a situation like that. But in this case, several months later, another person was charged. North Bay police charged another woman with providing false information in relation to Luke Joly-Durocher's missing person investigation. This is Jacqueline Kelly, a 48-year-old from the North Bay area. She was also charged with similar things, and I don't know if it was her working in connection with that other person, like if they were doing it together, or if it was just two separate people who came forward with information that they knew was false.
Like, I just want to know what would possess somebody to do that, and like 2 years later. Yeah,
it seems to happen often. I often hear of like just these wingnuts coming out with weird stories that people dismiss. It's just you rarely hear of them getting charged. Because how do you? I
guess lots of wingnuts come out with their own versions of what happened, but do they usually go to police? They usually just say it on the internet.
Yeah, but in this case, it was implicating someone else. So I wonder if they had a bone to pick with someone and they tried to set them up or something. It doesn't make a lot of sense of what they were doing, but whatever it was, the police not only knew that it wasn't true, they were able to prove it and got a conviction. Like
Well,
they would have had to been able to
good.
prove that the people knowingly gave false information. But here's a part of the problem with this is you talked about, you go to the police and not just post it online. Apparently they also posted it online. And what has happened is some of the elements of the fake story that they were convicted of drumming up, some of those elements come up all the time now in new tips. Like, so it's kind of like poison the water supply of information, I guess. Like these little elements of those faulty or fraudulent tips have just become part of the story. So, as time goes on, it's probably harder and harder for investigators to, is this someone who's just heard the same crap that's been going around, or someone who knows?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate.
Yeah. But there is a belief that someone out there knows what happened to Luke, and that's part of the reason the police upped the reward. There's currently a $50,000 reward for information related to him, to his disappearance and locating him. Investigators and his family have made it clear they suspect foul play in his disappearance. And that, to me, that seems...
Well, when someone just disappears without a trace, it's pretty hard not to assume that.
Yeah, well, the disappearance is one thing, but I think what really grinds my gears is his stuff was in the apartment. If he was... Yeah, we'll get into, in a moment, we'll get into kind of the theories and some of the more... Actually, what we'll do next, let's get into some of the kind of current present day search for Luke, and then we can give our opinions and maybe get into some of the most prevalent theories. So the biggest update, other than the $50,000 reward and the confirmation that he was at the Shooter's Bar, which is at Voyager Hotel or Motel, Luke's family has partnered with a private investigator and are funding their own search as a result of that, which is really keeping, someone digging. With this much time passed, 12 years later, I'm sure police aren't out there beating the streets every day, but a private investigator will.
His family reminds me a lot of Madison Scott's in the sense that they have never given up the search for him.
Yeah. We covered Madison's story on this show several months back, but yeah, I do see some elements with that case, and I also see some connections with the disappearance of Chris Metallic that we talked about together as well.
Right,
the young man in New Brunswick who, after a night of drinking or during a night of drinking, it disappeared. But as far as Luke's story in present day, again, they have a private detective working with them or for the family. The private detective and the family has made it clear that they don't believe for a minute that he ran off with a girl. They don't consider suicide a possibility. They, at least publicly, Luke is said to have not suffered, depression or mental health issues or had any kind of traumatic event play out in the time leading up to this. Nothing to lead his family to believe that it was a suicide. They did make it clear that they suspect foul play, and they've said as much to the media countless times. I've found 5 different interviews with his family saying that they believe that's what happened, and they're just hoping someone can come forward and tell the police what had happened. And that said, this is one of those cases where, again, there's a lot of rumors going around, but what the private investigator had said in an interview is that a lot of the rumors involve the same group of people in a lot of the same circumstances. And I don't know, when there's a lot of smoke around a couple people, there's got to be some fire. And I think in this story, at this point, I just want to know who drove him from Shooters. I feel like that's what they need to figure out.
That's always the biggest key piece of evidence is who was the last person they were with.
Mm-hmm.
That's super important because even if he was met with, like, if it was some sort of accident, which we'll get into, there would be evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't accidentally get killed and then disappear.
Mm-hmm.
people, there's evidence of that being an accident.
Yeah, we have enough of the story out there now that we can kind of maybe talk a little through what we're thinking or what we think may have happened ourselves and what kind of problems there are with it. Because I found with Luke's story and the facts of his disappearance, I just can't come up with anything that kind of all fits together. Like I can't get the pieces together right in my head. So Luke had planned to return home. There was a party on that Sunday for his sister. The last, we mentioned they found his cell phone in the apartment. The last contact on his cell phone was him calling his dad earlier in that evening. And he was even talking to his dad about getting a ride back to their hometown. Like that was a part of his plan. So you could say, like, did Luke maybe, I don't know, go hitchhiking or something, or try to get a ride back to Quebec with somebody, and something happened along the way there. My problem with that is you wouldn't, as a 20-year-old, you wouldn't leave your jacket in winter and your cell phone at the random apartment you're staying in, even if you're drunk. Like that just doesn't make sense. It's not like you can rip back and grab your phone, a couple weeks later in the neighboring province. I don't think he left North Bay, and I don't know why his phone was back at his apartment.
Well, and this is one of the things, and because there are so many rumors that aren't fact floating around, I'm second guessing what I actually know about the case, because I knew that, or I thought I knew that his last communication was with his dad and orchestrating a ride home, which begs the question, why would he plan to take a bus home the next day when he already asked his dad for a ride? And he would absolutely not. Like, I know hitchhiking is one of the theories floating around of what happened to him. Why, like, he wouldn't. He already had those. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either. And it would have had, he had a place to stay. If he leaves the bar and goes back to the apartment and takes off his coat and stuff, he's not going to then go outside without his jacket and his phone and, walk to the highway and hitchhike. You would just sleep it off and deal with it in the morning, I think.
You'd think.
Yeah. But
that's what I would do.
But here's the other thing then is, considering all that, he is in Shooters, this other bar on the other side of town. It's not like it's like, hours drive away or anything, but it's on the other side of town. How does he end up over there alone? Who is he with? Who's he going to see? Did he drop off his phone before or after? Did he drop off his phone or did someone else?
Right.
He said to have, and according to the police timeline, the official source, he did leave there with at least one person in a vehicle to be driven somewhere.
Well, and he's not from the area. So why Shooters? How did he decide to go there, of all places in North Bay?
And where his last known activity on the phone was earlier in the day talking to his dad, early in the evening talking to his dad about a ride. It's not like he was on his phone texting another friend who was in town and, I'll meet up with you. So it seems like he must have just, went over there. But I guess that's part of the mystery is, how does he end up there and where do they take him?
Yeah. And that's what I mean by, we have quite a bit of information about the night in question, but there's a few very important holes that need filling.
Well, people have tried to fill the holes. We can assume investigators know more than the public does, but given the information that's out there and the rumors that are swirling, there are several prevailing theories on what had happened. The first one is, I'm just going to call it the random assault. This, if you read message boards online, a lot of kind of armchair detectives will stand behind this theory. That theory is that Luke was walking home alone and got into a physical confrontation near the apartment. And from there, he was either moved into the house or chased into the house, possibly into the building's crawl space. The crawl space of the building is like, instead of a basement, it's just like, it's kind of like a low ceiling basement and it's not finished. I don't know if if everyone knows what a crawl space is, but theories. The building that he stayed in, the apartment that he was in, it did have a crawl space below the living area, and there had been lots of rumors, tips, discussion about something happening in the crawl space relating to his death. That would have been searched when police searched the building 6 weeks later, and they had never revealed the results of that. So we don't know for sure, but if there was any credibility to that theory. But I think just the idea that a young man walking home alone through a rough neighborhood, like something could happen, run into the wrong person,
but a random assault would give a lot of physical evidence,
especially when there's snow on the ground, like blood.
Right? Yeah, that either police would find weeks later, or even like a cadaver dog could sniff out weeks later. So, but like you said, the results of the search were never released.
Exactly. So. But is there a reason for that? Which tells me like it's I'm grilling you. I'm like, Madelayne, did you do hard drugs today? And you're like, I'm not saying anything. And I'm like, definitely did.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, did you guys find anything interesting? We're not revealing that information. So, okay, well, what did you find?
Yeah, exactly. If you can neither confirm or deny, that's a confirmation.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. But maybe what they're doing is just protecting, like maybe they're like, we found stuff that's probably nothing, but we just don't want, we don't want to ruin any piece of evidence. So I don't know. I'm going to give them a benefit of a doubt. Maybe.
And you never know. What if years later that evidence ends up coming to fruition and meaning something? Yeah. And we just don't know.
Yeah. The other theory, and this one's a bit more complicated, this involves debt. Many people have said Luke was killed over a small debt, something like $20. So here's how the theory goes, is that Luke owed someone money. Outside of the bar or on the street or wherever, Luke encountered the person that he owed money to. They made Luke go to the bank machine to get the money that they owed him, or that he owed them. When they go into the BMO, where Luke is thought to have been seen going into, Luke realizes he doesn't have his debit card. So the person says, let's go back to the apartment and get it. Or Luke says it's back in the apartment.
Oh, yeah.
The idea
was in a snowbank this whole time.
Right. The idea is they get back to the apartment. The debit card's not there. Something happens. Luke is killed. And that explains Luke's phone and jacket and stuff being at the apartment. If that was him on it going into the Bank of Montreal, it explains how he went in without withdrawing anything. And of course, as I mentioned, his debit card was found in a snowbank. So, he just lost it on the way to the bar that night, and this whole chain of events happens after. So a part of me thinks, was that just someone who was really thinking of like, what is an explanation that could put the debit card in the snowbank, Luke going into the BMO, and his stuff at back at the apartment? And, that would work. That would fit it.
Yeah, it's probably the most, I don't want to say the most plausible theory.
Yeah, it's certainly not plausible, but it checks out.
Right. And I want to say, like he was in a different city, who would he know? But I guess it was only an hour away, and it's a small world. So you never know who you're going to run into.
Yeah. And where he's from on the border, like North Bay would be it would make sense that you would go there for the weekend, to the city, go to the bars and stuff. Like I would think these wouldn't have been his only friends in town. He would know people.
Right.
I would think. So that's another theory. I guess you said plausible and then you backed off. I would say like maybe something like logical, like it would make logical sense. Like it would. Yeah. So
that's a better word to use.
Here's another one. This also comes up a lot in missing persons cases. An idea that Luke may have stumbled off and drowned. There's a lake near there, Lake Nipissing. The idea is Luke may have walked onto the lake, which would have been frozen, being drunk, ended up falling in, and wasn't able to get out. That is a theory that's going around, but I think I don't give it any credibility because, for one, these areas have been searched thoroughly. Nothing has ever turned up. It again doesn't explain why he would have dropped off his phone and jacket. Like, would he drop that stuff off and then go walk across a lake?
Right. And also, wasn't it very cold? Then the lake still would have been frozen, so it would have been pretty obvious if and where he fell through.
Yeah, there'd be like one hole where, like, there's a missing person and there's one hole in the lake near where the missing person was staying.
Right.
Yeah, that.
And I don't know how big Lake Nipissing is, but yeah, I'm going to assume that something would have come up by now.
Then the other thing too is he managed to get to a bar on the other side of town. Like, it wasn't like he was so drunk and disoriented he couldn't do anything. Like, somehow he ended up over there. Like, why is he walking around on a lake? We've already talked a bit about the other theory, which is relating to hitchhiking, trying to get back home and getting a ride with someone and getting into trouble. I also don't give a whole lot of credibility to that. For one, he had a ride home the next day. It seems multiple options to get home the next day. But if he was going to hitchhike, he would take his jacket, he would take his phone.
Why would he leave the apartment to go hitchhike empty-handed?
That just doesn't make sense.
No.
So I think, all things considered, if I was to decide, I would say certainly this is one where I feel pretty strongly that foul play is involved. I don't.
It would shock me if it wasn't. I would just be baffled.
Yeah, and I think the police, I think, are likely on the right trail, on the right track for the people responsible. And I wonder if it wasn't until years later they came out and said, yes, he was at Shooter's Bar. That is actually his last known whereabouts. I wonder if they knew for years that he was there, but they didn't want to say anything because that was, like, holdback information.
Right.
And then eventually, like, what police will do, investigators will do, is as a case is becoming colder and colder, they'll do things like raise rewards, of course. And in Luke's case, there's a $50,000 reward, but they'll also do things like reveal a bit more information. Usually it'll be like photographs, like CCTV camera footage, or maybe a new detail. And the reason they do that is it just lights up the whole thing again. The news is reporting on this new detail. There's a press conference. Everybody will talk about it again. And maybe one of the people who know what happened, or maybe the girlfriend of the guy who did it, they've since broke up, and she's like, oh, now's my time to come forward and just tell the story. Like, I kind of think that this information, this detail about him going to that other bar later that night, I think may have been something they've known for a while. And I think it's very important.
Absolutely. Well, and a lot of the times they'll withhold information because they don't want the perpetrator knowing what they know. They don't need them knowing just how much they know. And then they can, flee or whatever.
What will break the case, I think, is someone talking. I don't think one person's involved. I think there's a group of people, maybe a small group, that know what's going on. Like, if he was at Shooter's, he didn't walk in there and sit down and talk to one person and then leave with that person and have that person kill him and no one else knows about it. That doesn't seem likely to me.
Well, and I'm going to assume the bar was packed. There are a ton of witnesses. They might not even know they're witnesses at this point. But yeah, it's very, very odd.
Additional witnesses have come forward, and we are aware that other people were socializing with Luke that night. Some of these people may be persons of interest, and we will be speaking with them as the investigation unfolds.
You've mentioned this before. There's a ton of internet theories and false information rolling around. But I read one claim, and this is also whoever commented it was hearsay to them as well.
Okay.
But I thought this was just kind of bizarre. Apparently in the area of one of the bars that he was at, either Cecil's or Shooter's, wherever, there was construction going on. And it was alleged to this person that he could have fallen into like one of the big construction holes, and then it was filled, never to be seen again.
Interesting. Well,
yeah,
I
thought
wonder,
that was a weird theory.
Again, I always go back to the jacket and the phone. So is that theory
Right.
that he walked home, dropped off his jacket and his phone, then he walked back downtown without it, fell in a hole, and then it got buried and never to be seen again?
That's true. The phone and jacket are the real, yeah.
Yeah, just I think so many theories that puts just such a big wrench in them, where to me it's either someone he knew did something and then dropped off his phone and stuff, and I still don't know why they would do that. Why wouldn't they just, like, if someone did something to him, why wouldn't they just chuck it in the woods, not bring it back to his apartment and drop it off there? I just
I don't know.
Yeah.
Trying to throw off police and if it was an assault somewhere, you'd think there would be some sort of witness, a neighbor, someone would have heard something. It's just crazy how little witnesses are in this case.
Yeah, but again, late at night, we've already talked about Jello shots and everything else. Like, it's a foggy night. How does the phone and jacket get there? So I think he takes it there. Does he take it there and then go somewhere else? Or does he go back to the apartment with someone, lay it down, and then something happens? You know, people talk about maybe something happened in the apartment, possibly involving the crawl space, like under basically the basement of the building. That would kind of check out, because that would give a reason for his stuff to be in the apartment. Just for an example, he comes home with, he goes to Shooter's and meets up with someone there. They go back to the apartment for some reason. He lays his stuff down. Things go wrong. Whatever happens ends in Luke's death and disappearance, with the phone and stuff still being there. That would...
Well, and just the mere mentioning of the crawl space is bizarre to me.
It's creepy.
Who dreamt that up? Because it's not his apartment. So there's no way he would have like ran to the building and into the crawl space. Well, and a crawl space is not somewhere you easily access.
But I could see how it would, in this case, I think there was like a little door in a closet or something that would allow you to go down in there. But I think a crawl space, if people are speculating theories and stuff, like, it's just such a creepy spot. I could see like it happened in the crawl space. But that said, if something horrible went on in that building, and you had to hide something, and you knew there was a crawl space there, there's a reason.
Where better?
Yeah, there's a reason people think crawl spaces are creepy, and it's not just because they're full of spiders and dark. It's because like, weird stuff happens in places like that. He had with him, and it was never found, was a very unique bright purple belt. It's a leather. It was like a leather belt, but you know what I mean by a studded belt? Like, it has all the studs around it. So it has all purple studs. It's a purple belt with purple studs. And he wore that night. That wasn't left at the apartment, but the belt seems to be the one that comes up a lot. Yeah.
We need security footage from Shooter's. I want to know if he was wearing the jacket at Shooter's.
Well, that would change everything.
That would shed some light.
While you're looking for that, see if you can get a look at the person he was leaving with.
Yes. More importantly, see if you can screw the jacket. Who was he with?
But that's the answer is to this case, is you figure out who he was with, and once you get that, you're hot on the trail of Luke, I believe.
Well, anything could have happened. He could have gone back to the apartment with one person, took his jacket off, put his phone down. Maybe they went out for a cigarette, and then someone else they knew drove up, and it was like, oh, why don't we go to the bar with them? Like, there's so many possibilities
Yeah.
of what could have potentially went down.
But like even that example that you just gave, there's now multiple people who
Right.
don't have anything to hide. That oh yeah, I saw Luke that night. We were having a cigarette, and then Mark pulled up, and Luke went with Mark.
Right.
So maybe police. There's certainly stuff that they're not on the news talking about, but whatever it is, it's not enough to solve it after going on 13 years, and that must be so frustrating. It's one thing, like you talk about some of these missing persons cases where they just vanish into the night and you don't know what happened. You can't, all these theories, it could be anything. In Luke's case, yeah, he does seem to vanish, but there's this other stuff that doesn't make sense. And that's almost
right.
like makes it even harder. Like if I feel like if I was his poor parents,
not knowing is worse than knowing.
Yeah. And just like being haunted by this idea of like, why was he at that bar? Who did he leave with? Like, what the hell is going on? And I've spent a lot just kind of like playing out different scenarios in my head with this story, and nothing makes any sense.
No, there's too many missing pieces of the timeline to make any of it make sense.
Yeah. Too many missing pieces, but I think it is the kind of thing where one of those pieces fall into place and, the whole house of cards comes crashing down for whoever is keeping this secret. And I think it's
hopefully,
I think it's going to come out.
Hopefully it comes crashing down soon.
Yeah, because it's heartbreaking for his friends and family. His buddy Brent, who was in town with him that weekend, that went in the bar when Luke didn't get in, he spoke on the CTV W5 piece, and it broke my heart hearing him describe it. Like the amount of like guilt and just what he must be living with at this point, having lost his friend like that.
When you think of everything you could have done differently.
Yeah.
And you just need a few seconds back, and but you can't.
But you think, when you're 20, like the amount of times you went downtown with your friends and you just all get mixed up, and he's probably gone with he's probably gone with a girl or ran into someone, whatever. It's like I've done that a million times, but the next day when they don't show up and you're like, oh shit, like
I can't count how many times that was my MO when I went to the bar. I'd go with friends, and immediately upon getting in, I would go a different way. I wanted to do my rounds, see who was there, kind of do my own thing.
Yeah, and sometimes I'd just be not feeling it. I'm like, I wouldn't say anything to my friends because they'd talk me out of it. I'd just leave and go home.
Oh, the old Irish goodbye.
Yeah, I did that all the time because my friends would beg me to stay or whatever. So it's like, no, I'm not getting them involved in this. I got to go to the bathroom, guys. I'm back on my couch.
I've done that and gone to a different bar by myself. Like it's.
But that's what, like when someone goes missing in the middle of that kind of night, I can see how complicated it must be. And then when you're an investigator and you're basically interviewing a bunch of people, a bunch of like kids who were drunk.
Exactly. And everyone's got a different version of what actually happened. And it's no one wins in this situation.
Well, let's start wrapping this one up, Madelayne. But before we do, I'd like to ask you, usually I ask you what's coming next on your YouTube channel. But I think you are pretty comfortable in your role of growing a baby.
I've taken a slight hiatus.
I've noticed.
Just due to the person I am. I still, weeks ago, we talked about, I said, I have a couple videos that I need to edit. I still need to edit them. I have them on my laptop. And I could just sit down and edit them.
But your YouTube channel has not gone cold, because you and I have been recapping and discussing the latest season of American Horror Story. Season 12, the season's called Delicate. You're a fan of the series. I haven't been, but I've agreed to watch the latest season with you. So far, I'm loving it. If there's people listening or watching us that are watching American Horror Story, tune into Madelayne's YouTube channel for our discussions about it.
And after we sign off tonight, that's what I'm going to do. The third episode should be on Disney, or where are we watching it?
Amazon
Prime. So
here's something I want
to
call out to listeners for. You know what time of year it is? It's October. Halloween is just around the corner. I'm now preparing for the Nighttime Podcast's annual Nighttime's Haunted Listeners Halloween special. This is Think Our Creep Encounter series, except replace the creeps with ghosts or men in black or vague figures standing at someone's bed when they're sleeping. Anything supernatural or paranormal. It could be a werewolf, for Christ's sakes. So what I'd like to do is get anyone out there who has a story of something they saw they can't explain, especially if it's a ghost story, because I love ghost stories. We want to hear from you, and we're going to do a Halloween special where Aaron from the Keep Canada Weird series, myself, and Madelayne Kline are going to get together and break down some of these encounters with freaking ghosts. The way you can share your stories is by going to nighttimepodcast.com/contact and send me a voice memo if you want to do it that way. You can also email me at nighttimepodcast@gmail.com and we can arrange something separately. Like you and I can hop on Zoom and we can do like a 5-minute interview or something. And if that's easier for you, whatever way is easiest for you to tell us about your encounter with the beyond.
I'm so excited for this.
I am.
It's going to be so good.
And I'm excited for you to meet Aaron. You guys don't know each other. Like my two best friends. My two worlds are going to collide. Oh,
I don't know what I'm more excited for, that or the paranormal. But it'll be good regardless.
Well, Madelayne, always a pleasure talking to you, even if the topics are awful and heart-wrenching and tragic. I'd like to talk about them with you.
There's no one else I'd rather discuss the awful with.
I want to thank you for joining Madelayne and I for this episode of Nighttime. Now, I'm going to start wrapping things up here, but before I do, let me end with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Monty Datta for contributing the music for this episode, LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers, and Madelayne for sharing another evening with me and with you, the listeners, at Nighttime. But lastly, most importantly, a massive thanks goes out to each and every one of you listening to this show, as without your interest and your support, Nighttime would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the Nighttime Podcast Premium feed. Lolly, Kara, and Anna, thank you for your generous support. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can give us a big hand by simply sharing this episode on social media and considering a premium feed subscription. If you're unfamiliar, the premium feed subscription costs only a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of the show, but the premium feed also gives you the episodes 2 days early, gives them to you ad-free, and gives you access to a full back catalog of Nighttime episodes. Sounds interesting to you? You can go premium now at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. If you have any story ideas, if you want to give feedback on the show, or if you have a question or comment you'd like to have aired and responded to in an upcoming episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. We look forward to hearing from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.